Ngā rākau takitaki in itself is a different approach to research. It's acknowledging that these two pathogens are really, they're vicious and they're taking out our taonga, and so we have to have a different approach to how we invest in the research to stop the decline, and so we have to allow flexibility in our research. Having that flexibility is really important in the wider Ngā rākau takitaki because it allows us to respond to our kaumātua and it allows us to respond to the ngahere as it evolves and as it adapts to what the pathogens are doing to it.
Our world is constantly evolving. We're going to always get more information and data. And the thing is, I think eventually we'll get to a point where if we have the information and data in a space that allows us to synthesize it effectively, it actually allows us to work together because we have an agreement on what we're doing. We may not all the time have that, but we'll have an agreement. We'll have a foundation. Because we both have Western knowledge holders and Indigenous knowledge holders, Mātauranga Māori holders, and whānau who are intimate with whenua, scientists and researchers who are intimate with biosecurity incursions, all these ngangara, are actually able to have real conversations because we have such a strong foundation of knowledge. When we were looking at the Mātauranga Māori framework and surveillance is about information and data. There are three propositions or value propositions that demonstrate the Mātauranga Māori framework. So how do you elevate Mātauranga Māori within the science and research space, and how do you elevate mana whenua within the surveillance and science research systems? And the first proposition, the value proposition, is about identifying where you have equitable or you provide equitable value in dollars. So if you give $1 to mana whenua, to a researcher and scientist, there's a equitable value either in dollar or resourcing or something to Māori. Obviously we'd like dollars for dollar. Where there is a science research project, within that research project in recognising Indigenous knowledge or Māori mātauranga, then you would give equitable value dollar for dollar to that Mātauranga Māori research aligned to that science or Indigenous Western knowledge system, science. So that's the first way. The second way is through status. So publications are a currency within the research system. And so often when Māori are engaged in research and science, the publication is actually the part where the science and research and their work is elevated internationally across their different organisations, groups, but also within the science system again. And so that recognition is given through that publication, and quite often Māori, even though they have been part of it, are seen as an acknowledgement, right? Or a reference to a kaumātua. So if Māori are contributing to the way in which that science and research is being developed, because now we've given them equitable status in the science system, then we want to see within the value proposition that Māori have, or mana whenua that have contributed, or Mātauranga Māori experts that have contributed, are elevated within the optic of that publication, or the way in which it's been presented. The third way is the way in which we value, share, look after, save, kaitiaki, information data, so within surveillance, it's intelligence, and also taonga. And so who has authority over that, who has protection of it, who controls that information data flow, the continuum of data and information that's collected while scientists and researchers are doing their mahi, where is Māori in that continuum? So the Mātauranga Māori framework is based on a Piki o Waitangi article, so we looked at those as a treaty-based approach. And we did that because Crown research funding is basically the Crown providing money to researchers and scientists. And so as we move into a space of seeking or recognising that we need cultural licence, the way in which we manage the relationships with mana whenua about their information, data and taonga is really important. because there's a high level of sophistication with Māori now as we become more engaged with scientists, researchers and agencies. And the value of information data in taonga, about taonga, is essential for us to be able to contribute, but also to take the lead in some of the work that we want to do. The conversation around Indigenous knowledge and Western knowledge is an interesting one because they're often juxtaposed against each other. And there's an expectation that Indigenous knowledge will be nested in Western knowledge. In fact, mātauranga Māori is often validated in the first instance about whether it's valued by a Western ideology and a Western validation system. The mātauranga Māori framework is a very simple framework. It recognises, one, that within biosecurity, we have biodiversity, which is like an inventory of our taonga that we have. And biosecurity is protecting that taonga against those invasive species that come in naturally or brought in through supply chains or things like that. So when we look at that, we know that we in Māori do not have intimacy with those introduced species, those pathogens. So we need science. Science links us to the knowledge around those things. But we have our own mātauranga and an intimacy with the taonga and its natural biodiversity. And we have multiple generations of that, and we still are actively working in our ngāhere, many of us. And so the mātauranga Māori itself doesn't need validation, Western validation. And so the mātauranga Māori framework challenges scientists and researchers to find a way to shift from just being a science project with mana whenua providing mātauranga or narrative to sharing information in a way that enables Māori to actually take the lead and have science and research inform their mātauranga for them to make better decisions and get better outcomes. So the idea around the Integrated Intelligence Platform was to assure that we had recognised data and information sovereignty and also recognise the role of the custodian, which in this within this work we are calling the person who holds the data, collects the data, shares the data, uses the data, and sometimes protects the data. So the custodian can be Māori or non-Māori. It can be a mana whenua or scientist or researcher, an agency, someone collecting information from trapping, or who is just a person who uses iNaturalist for a community project. So those are all custodians of data. And so the Integrated Intelligence Platform uses the origin of that data, so where it comes from, the whenua, where it comes from, the naturescape or waterscape, and anchors that back to the mana whenua, what we've developed a land space is called a biodiversity management area. The biodiversity management area is the sovereign authority of that data and information. And the reason we used a naturescape or a landscape as the anchor for the data and information sovereignty is because the naturescape will never change. And so over multiple decades, we'll be able to, mana whenua will be able to have a library or I'm saying bulk, but a digital space where all information and data that's collected about their taonga or about their rohe is anchored to that biodiversity management area. When we went and talked to scientists and researchers and agencies, one of the biggest issues was around data information, data integrity, and data duplication. And so, data information flow. And so the Integrated Intelligence Platform doesn't hold information. What it does is mirror information from those custodians who lodge their information, data and publications directly to the mana whenua biodiversity management area. And so it recognises both data sovereignty and data custodians. So by recognising the biodiversity management area, by assuring that the biodiversity management area has now become, is now holding that information and data, because it gives whakapapa, recognises the whakapapa of that information and data, it demonstrates the least requirement for cultural licence. In the first instance, in order to respect or give effect to cultural licence, you have to recognise the provenance of that data and that information in a real way. And in the second space, because it's district based, you have to recognise and acknowledge the sovereignty of that data and information, which is the engagement you have with mana whenua about the controls, protections, and the other mechanisms that mana whenua need to have around the way in which their information and data is being used in research and science reports and publications that potentially could rewrite their narrative, their cultural narrative. Our specific team that's working on this work is Dean Anderson and Audrey Listig from Manaaki Whenua, they're modellers, and their work is around the platform development, but also around looking at the interface between what's happening on the ground, so mapping disease fronts, and putting a model in place that uses the information and data. Because one of the key things that the Māori working group wanted was applicability, the ability to apply directly the work in the field, in the rohe, in the ngahere. Part of that team is also, and we share Ngāri Williams with plant host pathogen, which is Julian Chittum and Vicky Ganley's work. And so she's looking at more the granular ways in which we describe the ways in which we will do surveillance and monitoring, and what are the parts of that information and data that will contribute to the decision making and to this other modelling. Shamila Sabramutu from Canterbury, she is doing this amazing piece of work on the data source, so the way in which the actual platform will work. Michael Martin has a PhD student he's just brought on, and they're looking at the web-based custodian vault, digital library, if I can say that, and the web-based digital library for the sovereign authority, for the BMA. We've also got a GIS specialist because the work is spatial, and so Māori and also other groups are able to overlay different layers, and so a picture tells 1,000 words. We quite like the idea around being able to present this information in a spatial way over multiple decades, because it resonates with our whānau, and it's also a way for us to be able to show change and demonstrate change. Cecilia Arienti is working with developing up metadata and attributes, and what we found was that, in relation to our Mātauranga Māori framework and the cultural license, that we don't actually have a lot of work out there around describing what cultural license looks like and what cultural attributes that sit within these information systems looks like. And so we are focused at the moment on developing those and drawing from all of the attributes that describe information data around taonga, around biodiversity, around the pathogens, as a way to enable a strong interface between all of those different information systems across the spectrum of science and research to be able to work well with the integrated platform. So this is a Māori sitting over here. And so Māori has sovereignty on the information from their taonga, and this usually sits within the way we relate to our land, so the biodiversity management area. So all of our information and data we have is gleaned from our whenua, from our experiences intergenerationally with that whenua. So we recognise our sovereignty and authority of that whenua and to those taonga and the information from it. A CRI will come across and say, we need to do something with that taonga. And so under this discussion, we say, okay, that sounds like a good thing, and we set up a cultural authority agreement. So we share either taonga information or data, and we agree on the purpose of the collection of that information, data or taonga, and we assert the relationship and the parameters for that relationship under a cultural authority agreement. That information is taken back and shared within the CRI. So the taongas, and so multiple people start generating information and data about that taonga. That then is housed in that CRI. The information and data that's being generated is now stored as part of the custodian storage. So how do we get this, so not just this, but how do we get this information back to here? And so that's what the platform does. It takes the data and information, and the we've got a BMA reference. We started initially with a BMA reference, but now we're talking about using Northeast because all collections have a Northeast, which is a GIS location, and it is mirrored. It's sent through the platform, loaded to the platform as the custodian. So the custodian loads that, and the integrated intelligence platform mirrors that information and data back to that BMA, or which the mana whenua of that area, or mana whenua cluster, if I could, those who are from that space have access to, and that's how the platform works. Māori having information and data and being able to influence key decision making, and inform the way we manage taonga, and being part of those decisions at the decision table. Because cultural sovereignty and cultural authority is sort of paramount within this conversation. It's not just any Māori, it's actually those Māori of that naturescape or waterscape. And so that's really, I think, the outcome of this. I mean, yes, there is the data sovereignty. I think that there are a lot of people working in this space. I think this is a solution. This is a solution that should be seriously considered. I think that scientists and researchers are more willing, and there is a significant appetite to find a way to share that information, data, intelligence about research and science, and work with Māori and form these strategic relationships. But ultimately, what I would hope is that the investments that are being made, there's an equitable investment that elevates Māori within the system, but more importantly, the information and data we're getting is purposeful and useful and actually takes us forward, doesn't keep us going in some sort of circle.